So I'm going to have to read. You're going to have to forgive me. I'm going to read from the handout.
Okay, I read too.
Okay. So Mark Epstein.
No, that's wrong. No,
It is what. Funny guy, real funny guy. That's good. So Mark, RLA, is a partner with Hafs-Epstein Landscape Architecture, a design firm in Seattle, Washington. Was it raining when you left town?
No, it's beautiful.
Good, good. His firm practices evidence-based design utilizing human psychology and site ecology to bring ideas to life.
Trademark.
Mark helped establish the ASLA Therapeutic Garden Design Professional Practice Network. I didn't know there was such a thing.
There is such a thing.
Wow.
Still exists.
That is cool. And is on the advisory boards of the Chicago Botanical Garden, Healthcare Garden Design Certificate Program, and the Therapeutic Landscape Network. He is a national expert on the creation of therapeutic and healing gardens, particularly in the hospitals and in public parks. It gives me great pleasure to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you. So I am notoriously soft-spoken. Is this picking up? No? You can't hear me? Is this projecting okay? Can you all hear me in the back? Okay, great. If you can't, just let me know and I'll try to step it up. So I hate following anybody who has a British accent because they always sound funny and smart, right? It's just and I love it. But thank you, Nicholas. It's great. I want to thank Village Nurseries. This is a tremendous resource you have here. I'm sort of jealous. In Seattle, I don't really know of a nursery that provides that much outreach to designers and to contractors. So you folks are very lucky. It's really great. Let me get a sense of just who's in the room. How many of you are licensed landscape architects? Okay, that's good. How many are contractors of one sort or another? Okay. How many do garden design of any kind? So just about everybody. That's great. Okay, it's a good mix. It's a really good mix of people. So my presentation is going to be a bit of an overview, and it's going to be pretty dense. So I want to make sure everybody has the handouts because I want you to have that to take with you because it's going to go pretty quick. And I also there's a lot of writing on the slides. I don't usually do that, but I wanted to have that information for you so you have that to take home. So thanks for putting up with that. I want to start with just a quick story of why, a little bit how I got into it when I first started. Teresa Hazen, by the way, sort of changed my view of how I design coming out of design school. That's right. Coming out of design school, you're taught, big D design, make things, a lot of kind of personal artistic. But I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and I was assigned to a project. We'll let that pause. And they assigned me to work with Teresa, who was the only horticultural therapist in Oregon at that time. And besides all the slide jokes of, giving psychology therapy to plants, Teresa really changed the way I approached my work. Because instead of thinking of high art, I really started to consider more about the user and their needs and their desires. And Teresa's going to go into that in a lot of detail, but it really changes the way you think. And a lot of this is just saying, let's consider who's going to use it, how they're going to use it, what their limitations are, what their abilities are. And we'll go through that. So therapeutic gardens in hospitals, and now most of my work has been in acute care hospitals or in public parks, which is really different. But I'll talk about this, but it really does translate to almost any other kind of setting, and even residential settings, it works well with that too. So I was at an appointment at one of the better hospitals in Seattle. Nothing serious, but I noticed in the elevator they said healing garden. So that piqued my interest. There weren't many healing gardens in hospitals. And it was on this floor. First of all, I walked right by it, and I had to go down the hall to a nursing station and said, where is the healing garden? They pointed me this direction. This is the first thing you see. This is the entrance to their healing garden. long hallway. You get down to the end of the hall, and you can't read the sign on the left, but it says, what does it say? I can't read it either. It says roof garden, no smoking allowed in roof garden, okay? And then also you notice there on the left picture, there's a lock. So I went and the door is locked. You can't even get out there. I had to go back to the nurse's station, got the code, punched into the lock. You get through the door and the picture on the right is what you see. So not very therapeutic really right from the start. Okay, so then once you finally get through that hallway, this is what you see. You're out on a roof. What do you see out there? Yeah. Mechanical equipment, right? Does mechanical equipment provide some noise? Yeah, there's some noise out there. And look at the plant material you have to interact with. Very much of it. What is the seating like? Not very good. So I just thought, oh, well, now it's a healing garden because there's an outlet box for IV equipment. So they are accommodating pedestrians, right? Or accommodating hospital patients because you can bring your IV pole out there and plug it in. Not too good. We can do better than this. This is the extent of the whole garden. To get from one end to the other, you had to go up some stairs and get down to the other side, and that brought you to the picture on the left. You're right outside some office windows. No one's going there. There's no place to sit. So it's not providing very much benefit, is it? So I'm going to go through. There's really kind of three elements to healthcare. Right? There's the curing. That's what doctors and nurses do. They help the body in curing that. So specialists do this directly for the patients. There's healing, which gardens I think can play a part in. So I think a garden's not going to cure anybody, right? It's not going to make any diseases go away. But healing is what happens inside a person yourself, and I think gardens can change some of that. And there's been research that supports that. And then there's caring, and I think this is really where gardens can really come into play, especially in a healthcare setting, but almost in any, it can in the hospitality setting, almost any setting. When a garden is well cared for and looks good, it has a lot of pleasing qualities to it. In a healthcare setting, it can make patients feel like they're well cared for as well, right? If they can take care of their landscapes, maybe they can take care of me pretty well as well. So healing gardens have you heard the term healing gardens before? That's kind of been the umbrella term, and it really is undefined. Almost anybody can call any garden a healing garden. But what it really breaks down to, and there's a lot of different types underneath there, and you can take a look at those at your leisure. But the two right below the healing gardens is really, I think, what it really comes down to. There's a restorative garden, which you get the benefits just from being in the garden. The user can use it any way they wish. It's non-guided. No staff necessary, except maybe for maintenance. And then there's enabling gardens, which have a little bit more design to them, I guess. So they're designed for certain activities that are led by staff. And those are probably more appropriate in chronic care facilities and physical rehab facilities. So let's talk about what therapeutic means when we're talking about therapeutic gardens. This is just a dictionary definition of it, but what I'd like to use is the third definition here, is that if it's contributing to a sense of well-being. And if you look at the Venn diagram up there, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things that maybe contribute to well-being. And really, we think about gardens. They have psychological benefits. They have physical benefits for exercise, and I'll get into this a little bit more. Social benefits. I think they really hit almost all of these. The environment is obvious, except for maybe economic, but maybe they have some economic benefits as well. So the number one question I get is, aren't all gardens therapeutic, right? Isn't just being in a garden therapeutic? And they become a fad. I do one presentation where I take photographs of gardens that people call healing gardens, and we critique them. And the fact is, not all gardens are. All these pictures are labeled gardens by the facilities that they're in. So well, except for maybe the one on the right there is actually outside of a jail, but the other two are within hospital facilities. But even then, the one on the right, is supposed to be there for, they call it for people, a place for children to play, children that are coming to visit their parent or someone who's in the jail. But it's really, I think, to be successful, you have to have that understanding of the human psychology, human elements, and that's what this is about. So that's all just the introduction. I'm going to go fairly quickly through these, was it 5, 6 different parts. We'll spend most of our time in the therapeutic design principles and best practices, because I think that'll be of the most value to you. But why are we doing this? What are some of the demographic changes? There's really just two. One, we are an increasingly aging population, especially in the United States. We've started this aging population boom in 2010. It's predicted to continue all the way through 2050, where the number of Americans aged 65 and older is projected to more than double. So we have to start thinking about our environments and designing for folks that are older. And the other thing is we have got many more people living in cities. People in cities have less access to nature, so anything we can do to bring those gardened or green spaces in to the built environment is pretty important. And there's also a lot decreased exercise from people living in cities too. A lot of, especially in our youth, are holding phones and not getting out. Let's talk about a couple public health issues. What do you think is one of the top public health issues? Obesity. So this is just a few things. So I want to show how obesity has increased in the United States just over this, I think, 15-year period from 1995. The light blue is better. So this is the percentage of the population in each of these states that are obese. So the light blue is under 10. The dark blue is 15 to 19. See how it changes from 1995 to 2000? As you get into the orange, that's over 20% of their population being obese. And then go to 2005, we've got the red is now over 30% of the population of obese. In 2010, we've got even more, actually, over 30 in almost all the country, I think, now. And the average, I think, the average right now is 2 out of 3 adults in the U.S. and 1 in 3 children are overweight or obese. Why is that a problem? Well, it causes early death. So we got to get people out moving more. There's a report from the International Agency on Research for Cancer. They say 1/4 and 1/3 of common cancers in the U.S. and other industrialized countries are caused by the joint effects of obesity and a sedentary lifestyle. So if we can get people outside, moving around, I think we are all doing good. It's a public health issue. So gardens have been shown to help children with autism and attention deficit disorder. There's been research that was done. There was particularly one psychologist that worked with kids with autism in Massachusetts. That's a picture of his garden he developed on the top there. Actually, those two pictures are his garden. It was basically just a big green space where kids could go out. There were places for them to hide and be enclosed. And he noticed a number of benefits for that. It helped these kids concentrate more. It decreased more aggressive behaviors in them. Just a couple of good books. If you want to, further reading on this topic, the one on the left is by Peter Kahn, The Human Relationship with Nature. He talks about how people are having the decreasing relationship with nature is causing a lot of environmental problems because of what he calls a shifting baseline. So the shifting baseline is we get used to a worsening condition. And the example he uses is with air pollution. I think he did a study in Houston, whereas as the pollution got worse, the next generation, that is their new normal. And so that is they're considering, what is good, and anything there is worsening. But over time, we have a cumulative worsening effect. And the book on the right, Last Child in the Woods, anybody familiar with that one? That one got very popular. Yeah, excellent read just about how we are missing out on getting nature and getting plants into the, you folks putting plants in is really helping counteract some of that. All right, let's get into a few research concepts. What are the underpinnings of therapeutic garden design? Biophilia, has that anybody heard of biophilia? And Edward Wilson? Just a few of you have. So he was a Harvard entomologist, and what he says is that we just have an innate affinity for certain landscapes. And so what he always talked about was a savanna landscape, and what humans like is having prospect and refuge. So they like to be contained and have a view out, and ostensibly to view danger out there. Stephen Kellert took biophilia and applied it to built environments. So he's saying the way we build things, people have either positive connections or, in some instances, if it's a poorly designed landscape, negative connections to our built environment. Attention restoration theory is one of my favorites. It's done by a couple of researchers at the University of Washington. And they said that mental fatigue, so when we get tired mentally, we get irritable, right? I think that's probably true. Most of us know that. And that irritability leads to aggression. And they looked at two types of attention. So directed attention and involuntary attention. Okay, so directed attention is when we're putting our brains to work and we're focusing on something. So involuntary attention is those responses that don't require concentrated effort. So when we're out in nature, we are giving our directed attention that chance to rest. And that is very restorative. That's why we intuitively feel good when we're in a garden or out in nature, because we don't have to think about it. Another way to think about it is when you're, how many are gardeners? Here anyway? Okay, so when you're out in the garden, does time kind of fly by? Yeah, you're really not using your directed attention there. You're using your involuntary attention, and you kind of lose track of everything out of time, and that's a restorative thing for you mentally. Environmental press. So really this is just saying is the environment, which is sort of along the bottom axis here, needs to fit the competence of the person using that environment. It's a pretty simple concept, but what happens is people forget who they're designing for, who the population is. And so this is just showing along the bottom axis residents of a assisted living facility versus a independent living, or one that has more abilities there, and personal competence on the vertical. So you just want to make sure there's that narrow range of fit between what a person can do and what the landscape allows them to do. And therapeutic gardens are just making that fit. The theory supported design by Roger Ulrich, who's probably one of the most cited researcher in the field, and his theory really just came down to these four things along the top: social support, control, exercise, and nature. And he's got research to back this up. All those things funnel in to reduce stress in people, and that stress reduction is what helps the healing, right, and the internal healing. And of those, I think the feeling of control is one of the more powerful. And the odd thing about control is even the illusion of control has health benefits. And so allowing people to go out and explore on their own, have them be more independent, is good for us. And what happens when you're in a healthcare setting, or if you have an injury, your control is lessened. And so things we can do to make the environment more able to be used by people with maybe decreased abilities gives us more control, has better health outcomes. And emotional congruence is a fancy term. It's just saying that how we're feeling going into an environment influences the stimuli that we get after that. So when we're stressed or feeling anxious, we remember more negative events than if we're not. If we're feeling good, we have more positive feelings towards things. It's as simple as that. Okay, any questions about any of those? Okay, we'll go in a little bit about the design principles. And most of these principles are universal design principles. Is everyone familiar with universal design principles? Anybody not? Okay. Okay, just a couple are not, but it's always good to get a reminder. I always forget these anyway. So the difference between universal design and ADA or accessibility designs, anybody tell me that difference? ADA, everyone knows what ADA is? ADA, it's what? American Disabilities Act, right? And that's just saying that you have to make environments for a minimum accessibility standards as defined by this federal act. Universal design takes, I think, a little different approach to saying, instead of saying minimal accessible, we're going to try to make the environment as accessible for as many people of as many different abilities as possible. And there's a few things that we'll go into here. I think I'll show you a few pictures that might help and some little tricks to make environments more accessible. Okay, first one is equitable use. This is an interesting, I think, universal design principle. The picture on the left shows one of those push merry-go-round things. You might remember these from your youth. They got rid of them for a while because they were considered too hazardous. In this is a child facility. They just made the ground level with that, so you could still have that spinning, which I guess also has some benefits for kids, without the liability of injury. So the whole idea about equitable use is that you're not.
I was going to say that also helps kids with the handicap as well.
That's right. So yeah, right. It's handicap.
Before you couldn't because it was elevated.
Right, because it was elevated. Now you could wheel in there, hold on, and have it go. Like the picture on the top just shows ramps that are integrated, so it's not only just for people that need wheelchairs, but all kids are using the same entrance to that treehouse structure. Flexibility in use. Look at the 3 hose bibs down below. You have your choice of what kind of handle you put on a hose bib, right? So which one do you think might be the most universal design? One on the right. You guys are good. And why? Because the one on the left, you need fingers and a hand to turn, right? And maybe if someone with arthritis can't grab that. The one in the middle, you actually need fingers. It's maybe even harder to use. But the one on the right, you could use with an elbow, or you can use with an arm if you don't have a hand. So it's just a simple choice like that. You start thinking about those little design details, and you're making environments with more universal design. So it's just what?
It's just a quarter turn.
And it's just a quarter turn instead of opening it up more, right? So when you're doing your designs, making the design that more simple and intuitive, easy to understand. So eliminate any unnecessary complexity. So you want it to have enough complexity, but not too much. And that changes, of course, from site to site. We're here in perceptible information. Does the design communicate the necessary information effectively to the user of that spot? So some of the guidelines here is you want to maximize the legibility. In this case, showing the pavement on the left, just changing the material, having that border allows someone with maybe some visual or perception problems, they can pick out where the edge of that walkway is going to be just by changing that. The picture on the right is at the Chicago Botanic Garden. That shows a garden bed with a metal grid on there, so folks that are blind actually can find a plot tactily and plant and still garden and know what is planted where just by its location. Well, that's a nice breeze, isn't that? That feels good.
Basically, it's just a grid.
It's just a grid, yeah. What they've also done there, you can't see in a photo, but along the concrete edge of it, they put little notches at certain distances all the way across the edge of that concrete ledge, so that they can count out from one edge where they are on the grid as well. A tolerance for error. So we want to make sure that we're going to minimize any hazards or adverse consequences, or any accidental or unintended consequences. So the threshold on doors is a big one. You know, pretty simple thing, often overlooked, but that can be a barrier for people that are using some wheeled instruments.
I think that's one of the biggest factors.
It's one of the biggest factors.
Yeah, I mean, especially like if you go to homes where they, you come out of the house and it drops, you got that 2-inch or the inch drop.
Right.
That's a big factor.
Right. So yeah, being aware of where walkways meet and how wide they meet. Really important, small detail, but really important. It can make the difference between someone being able to use it or not. Okay, good on time. So can the design be used efficiently and comfortably with a minimum of fatigue? I think these two pictures are from Teresa's gardens in Legacy. So are you designing a space that a user can maintain a neutral body position? The photo on the top shows a step down wall, and that is just so people of different heights can sit at different levels and either get next to the plants, interact with the plants, or in some cases, plant or prune or maintain them. Okay. Where are we? Size and space appropriate for use. So in this one, similar to really the last principle, but are there adaptations so that the user can reach, manipulate, and use regardless of their body and size. This example, like the planter on the bottom, was one that we worked on with Teresa. It's in a Portland park, and it was one of the first variable height planters that I had come across. We thought we were pretty clever in doing that. But now you see them all the time. But it's just starting from one end. This is just a flat walkway, so it's not taking up a slope. But the planter we slope so that people of different heights can use the planter itself to lean on or sit on. And is the size and space for approach and use, also sort of building on the last two slides. Is the reach comfortable? This is a planter that's up at chest height, so that people don't have to sit. There's people that can't sit or bend, and you're still able to plant at a higher height. And one of the intriguing things I saw, this is also at the Chicago Botanic Garden, is the planter has a reveal underneath that's high enough for a shoe to get under. So instead of having to lean over the planter, you can actually get right up to the wall, and it increases your reach into the planter itself. And finally, is the space enjoyable to use? Is it fun? We have to have some opportunities. This the top picture is is one of my designs, also in Oregon, I guess. It's what I call the rain curtain fountain. So it's just a water feature that comes all the way to the ground. It allows kids to run through it, as you see here, having a good time. It allows people in wheelchairs to get right up to the water and touch it. So there's more opportunities to interact with the water. All right, let's go into a few quick things. These were taken from presentations I've given to architects, but they are also very appropriate for landscape architects and garden designers. Improved wayfinding. In hospitals or institutional facilities, start right when people get out of their cars or where they enter. A lot of times we don't think about those spaces. Okay, next principle is providing social support. The way that seating is arranged has a lot to do with how much people interact. You folks are all in a line now, and we're not really interacting much with your neighbors. You're just focusing up here. But so if you put chairs at a 90-degree angle, there's more social support there. One of the things we found in the past, it's in landscape architecture magazines, you often see seating that's either concentric, or what's the opposite of that? It's either they focus inward or focus outward, right? And there are some settings where maybe it's appropriate where seating is focused outward. For example, in a subway station where maybe you don't want to interact with your neighbor waiting for a train or a bus. But in most garden settings, in most healthcare settings, we want to have, well, we want to have a variety of seating, but we want to have some seating at least that allows that small group interaction. This is a natural provide nature distraction. Just that's pretty obvious for all the reasons we've talked about so far. They have seen that artwork, if you're thinking about artwork, take a look at the artwork next time you go into a clinic or a hospital and see how you feel. There's been a lot of research done about this as well. And the preference that they've found in the research is that representational nature, so not so much abstract nature, are what people respond to most and have better physiological responses to as well. And of course, people love water. So if you can provide any kind of water in your gardens, those rate really high. The location of a garden. Is it visible? Think about where you're putting the space. And this can be true within a backyard garden as well as a hospital setting. Is it visible? Is it easy to find? Are the doors accessible? Can you see through the doors to find where the garden is? The garden well signed? Do people know it's there? Most hospital gardens, people don't even know that there is a garden at all. Considering some of the materials you're using for paths, don't use bright white concrete. It creates a lot of glare. Creates for people with visual acuity problems. It can be blinding. So if you just add some mixture to it or use pavers that have some color to it, that seems to help. Paving joints should be at least no more than 1/8 of an inch thick between, so that folks that have wheeled instruments, or especially in IV poles in hospitals, they can get across it, and create a variety of different subspaces. The seating. So when we're talking about designing for the elderly, most need higher seats than typical, and there are some seats out there that are created with that are just a few inches higher than a normal seat that you're sitting in now. Arms and backs are really critical for those that have mobility issues. And provide seating. It's funny enough, having movable seating seems to be really critical because people love to create their own seating things. And you notice even in a plaza, people will take a chair if it's movable and move it an inch or two. There's something innate just about wanting to create that space. Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with Balboa Park and the big plaza of Panama and that part of it, but 2 years ago we put in a bunch of tables and chairs with movable seating.
Right.
And before nobody used the space, and now it's just wildly popular. And
Yeah.
the chairs migrate all over the place.
Right.
There's always people grabbing them, moving them, putting where they want.
Right.
It's become an incredibly welcoming space.
Right. Everybody hear that at Balboa Park? Having movable chairs made a difference to the space being used or not. So yeah, it can make a huge difference. Yeah.
You said a little higher seating. Are we talking 20 inches or 19 inches or what?
Yeah.
As opposed to 18 inches?
Right, as opposed to 18 inches, if you have a seat height, I think that's 20, and I think they make something that might even be 21 and maybe even 22 inches in some instances.
What's
But
the rationale for that? As people age, they shrink.
yeah, our people are smaller. Yeah, so the rationale for higher, it's just going from down here to up here. It's just a little bit easier, and especially if you have then arms, you can help push yourself up. Good, that's great. Yeah.
I know there's standards for ADA inside the building, but outside the building, benches and that sort of thing are still kind of developing ADA guidelines for that, yes, no? With the back, with an arm, with or without, one arm?
Yeah.
What's the current?
Yeah, the question are, what are the ADA guidelines for outdoor spaces? And there really aren't any that I know of, unless they are, I know they have them for the hospital gardens I've worked on. They do have to be ADA accessible. But I think they're not as stringent in outdoor spaces as they are for the interiors, yeah. That's a good question. Plants. What's a garden without plants? Surprisingly, you would be surprised how many gardens I've seen that don't have very much plants. And some of the research that's been done shows you got to have at least more than half, right? You got to have at least 60%. And I think what they're finding is the best ratio is about 7 to 3, about 70% planting to paving. If you have that, then it feels lush enough to be a garden. So if you have a lot more paving than plants, then it becomes more of a patio than a garden space. And have those plants accessible at different heights if you can, for people to get at them and interact with them. Maintenance is critical. One thing I've learned from Teresa, she won't design any garden that doesn't have a maintenance budget in it. So if you don't have healthy plants, you have a garden that feels like it's not being taken care of, and it does not feel good. Provide some space for storage, and we can read those. Add some details, some fine texture to your garden. Add some sculptures, wind chimes, bird feeders. People love the introduction of wildlife. Anything you can do to attract birds, even squirrels in more senior facilities, senior housing facilities. People just love to look at it. It gives them something to look at. And of course, water. And the garden atmosphere. The whole idea in gardens is they normalize environments that may not feel normal. So in hospitals, we don't have a very normal feeling place. And when you have a garden inside that space, and I think that relates to all institutional settings. They create inviting places for us to lie down. The great quote I've heard is that nature expects nothing of us, right? It allows us to be who we are. So. And just quickly finishing up here, some of the benefits. There are medical, subjective, and economic measures. Some of the medical measures that have been documented through research, quicker recovery and physiological response rates. So blood pressures go down when we're in nature. We feel calm here. Reduction in pain medication. That's the study Roger Ulrich did way back in the mid-90s, where they monitored patients' complaints, requests for pain medication, and length of stay for patients that had a view to nature versus the ones that didn't. Simple as that. And the ones that did got out of the hospital a little bit quicker, requested pain medication less, and had fewer complaints. So thought they were more well taken care of, just from a view of a tree outside a window. It's pretty powerful. Stress reduction probably is important for staff. In healthcare in particular, it's a very stressful job. And retaining staff is very important, and creating an environment and atmosphere that staff enjoys. Not only may reduce medical mistakes, but also help retain some of those staffs. Cost of replacing a nurse at a hospital is thought to be at least $100,000, something like that, in recruiting, training, and all that. So it's real money and saved. So if a garden can provide some of that, it has real benefits. Think about, again, we're talking about the emotional congruence. If you were in a hospital and you had to get some bad news, you were getting the bad news in the environment on the left versus a clinical room on the right. How do you think you're going to feel in receiving that news? It's still bad news, but one can make you feel a little bit more hopeful, a little bit more relaxed. And I know in the gardens that we've built in healthcare settings, spiritual care are big users of those gardens. The biggest users are not patients, because most of them can't go out, but staff and spiritual care or doctors use gardens to give that bad news. So they found gardens. This is also a hospital in Oregon. It's outside an emergency room. They found just having a view like this helps reduce incidents and agitation of people in the ER rooms themselves.
they
Right.
decided to put them into the visiting areas for the people that come to visit.
So Scripps
That's just locations.
Scripps has TVs with nature scenes on them.
Giant screens.
Giant screens, yeah. And we can, yeah, that's a whole other talk about, about technological nature versus real nature. That's always interesting.
You can't have plants necessarily in those rooms post-surgically, so.
Right, that's right.
So
Okay,
What is the percentage of hospitals having a garden?
what is the percentage of hospitals that have
Yeah,
gardens?
Actually, the hospitals.
So this is the good news. So when we sort of started this through the ASLA group, there were very few. This is back in the mid-90s, mid-1990s. People didn't think the landscape was just thought of a open space between the parking lot and the in the room, and the building, and the interior courtyards really weren't very gardened either. Now I'm happy to say that there's probably not a clinic or hospital built now that doesn't have some sort of some garden inside
Courtyard.
and throughout, either courtyards or outside the building or in front, incorporated somewhere in
So
there.
the percentage is definitely increasing.
Percentage is very much increasing. Yep. This is a 3-minute video. I'm not sure we want to see it, but I thought it encapsulates. Maybe we just have one screen on this. I don't know if we can get them to go at the same time. I don't know if we can get it to go at all. We'll see how it goes.
Dr. Clemens, 6800. Dr. Clemens, 6800. Right burner, 6520. Right burner, 6520.
Okay, that's good. And just a few resources that you have there for you to take with your packet. The ones on the top, I think, are really beneficial. The Therapeutic Landscapes database, it's healinglandscapes.org. That has all the information you would ever need to get you going on this. The Chicago Botanic Garden, Nicholas mentioned an instructor there. They've had a class in healthcare garden design for 16 years now. It's a 8-day intensive course. It's expensive, but it's a life-changing course if you when want to get into this in a lot of depth. So thank you. I'll take. Thank you. Got a couple minutes for questions, Juan? Or
Great, yeah.
Yeah.
How about some really gripping questions?
yeah.
How do you get the certifications? What entitles you to be certified?
So the question is, how do you get certification, and what entitles you to get certification? So certification, by definition, just says you've completed a course of study that says you have a certain knowledge that you didn't have before. And that's all a certification is. It's not a license. It's different than that.
It's like taking that course.
Yeah, the course at the Chicago Botanic Garden is the only one I know now that has a course that certifies you in that. If somebody knows another one, let me know. Yeah.
Could you describe your favorite project you worked on and why?
My favorite project and why, relating to therapeutic gardens? Let's see. Ooh, that's a tough one. So they're all very satisfying. So the one I showed you, I think, it was the one I showed you with the kid running through the rain curtain garden. Yeah, this one right here. Okay. This one I think was very gratifying, just because it was supposed to be a demonstration garden for therapeutic gardens, and it was one of several other different types of gardens that were built there. There's one frustrating story I'll share with you on this too, with this water feature in particular. Maybe you can relate. This is sort of the bumps in the road story. This water, when it comes down, it's coming from 8 or 9 feet high, right? So that makes a certain sound when it hits the bottom. And I had wanted to put in a material that helps dampen the sound and also prevent splash, because I wanted people to get right up to it without feeling splashed. If you get that splash, you kind of it's repelling. And for some reason, they didn't want to do that. And you could hear this water hitting the pavement. They just put in a French drain, I think. You could hear the water hitting the pavement from half a mile away, before you got to the garden. I think they did eventually put in something to deaden it, and still it gets used on hot days. But because of that, just seeing kids like that use that, and seeing other people use it, the very first the dedication for this, the donors for the garden came out with an umbrella and stood under there for the picture, and so that was really fun. Yeah. It's a nice question. Yeah.
Deciduous plants, how are they in healing gardens? Are they acceptable, or is it
Yeah.
preferable to have evergreen?
So the question is, are deciduous plants acceptable in gardens, or are evergreens preferable? Hold on for a second. So that is a really good segue question for Teresa, because she deals with plants in the gardens all the time. From the gardens that I've worked in, I use deciduous plants a lot. It depends on your climate. So up in the Northwest, we want the leaves gone in the winter because we need as much sunlight as we can. And shade is important in the summer because it does get hot up there in the summer as well. But almost like an integrated design, I use conifers for structure and for year-round interest, and deciduous plants for shade and for a lot of the visual interest, and for flowers. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it.